Jake Moody, I want to start by giving him some props. He this year made 84% of his kicks. That's 21 of 25 kicks he's made. 84% is also the same percentage of kicks that Robbie Gould made. So a lot of people have been kind of calling for Robbie Gould. So Jake Moody's rookie year, he made 84% of his kicks. Now, my biggest issue is not that Jake Moody missed his extra field goal point after, by the way, right after I tweeted, because on the broadcast they were like, oh, he's like historically not had a miss. This is like he broke an NFL record for the most extra points without a miss and then immediately missed. Like, so they totally jinxed him. But my biggest concern isn't that he missed a field goal kick and an extra point kick. It's that he missed them back to back, and that the last time that we saw him struggle with kicks, something similar happened. And that to me says it's a confidence issue, and that's a problem for a big game. Because I don't care if you miss, I mean, I'll probably, if you miss one extra point in a playoff game or in a Super Bowl and you lose it, I'm definitely going to care. But if it's earlier on in the game like that, what's most important is that you are able to bounce back. And if, okay, you missed an extra point, but they walk down the field for you again to get a field goal and win the game at the end of the Super Bowl, at the end of the playoff game to get to the Super Bowl, don't freaking be in your head because you missed one kick earlier on in the game. And that unfortunately seems like something he really struggles with. How was the atmosphere in the stadium? Can you take me, I don't know if you could see the sidelines. I'd love to know what maybe the coach was looking at, what the players were looking at, and how the vibe of the fans and yourself was with the whole Jake Moody confidence kicking situation.
Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of things. Confidence, personally, I don't think it's the biggest issue. I thought there was wind. He shanked both kicks to the right. So I think it was more so just really he missed those two. Now, I will say this. There are a couple of people that I've seen, online or something, where you're saying you don't want to worry about Jake Moody. There's no reason to worry about him. And that's where I think they're wrong. At any other position in the NFL, I think you could make that argument. But the reason you can't for a kicker is how integral they are to the game. I think that when you talk about a young kicker, talking about being reliable in the playoffs, that is ultimately integral to how a team performs in the playoffs, because your entire coaching philosophy shifts if you can't trust your kicker to make big time kicks in the playoffs. And the issue with Jake Moody, you brought up how he's kicking, I believe, 84%. He came into the game at 87.5%. That's not great in terms of the overall NFL landscape. He is 15th in the NFL when you're talking about qualified kickers at 87.5%. I mean, you can talk about 87.5%. That sounds good, but he's 15th. Now, he did make all 58 or 59 of his extra points heading into this game. That's crucial. But the 49ers, you can't afford to lose games on kickers, on kicking. And if you're talking about Jake Moody specifically, the 49ers lost 2 games this year because of their kicker. They lost today because their kicker missed 4 points, and then they lost against the Browns when Jake Moody really struggled in that game and also missed the game-winning kick. You had 2 different opportunities this year for your kicker to win you games, that you could have won and you didn't win. Again, Moody can 100%.
High pressure situations too, right?
They are. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know how high pressure you consider today overall, but still, that's 2 games that you could have back. Did it matter in the end? No. But will it matter potentially in the playoffs? Yes. I think kicker is the one position where you can't afford for development if you are a winning team. Kyle Shanahan knows this. I think the majority of teams in the NFL know this, which is why they rely on veterans and why they rely, or why you might see a lot of changes happening in the kicking world on a week-to-week or even year-to-year basis, because success is extremely important at that position. And so if you're Jake Moody, I don't think today's issue was a confidence issue. I think he missed both kicks wide right. There was little wind, maybe not, whatever you want to call it. But even if it is a confidence issue, this has to be shaken. And I think that you do have a right to worry. Will this happen in the playoffs? I don't know. But overall, you do have a right to worry, because this is something that the 49ers should not be trying to have to deal with going into the playoffs, because it might change the way that Kyle Shanahan wants to run things. You might go shy away on a 4th and 3 if you have a 50-yard field goal. because you have some issues with, some lack of faith with your kicker. And so it'll be intriguing to see how it is. I don't think Shanahan loses confidence in him. And I also think the 49ers, at least in the divisional round, should be in a good enough place to where they can trust him and still reap, the results, good or bad, should whatever happen.
I was gonna say in the post-game press conference, I forget who it was. I think maybe it was Matt Mayoko asked Kyle Shanahan if they would be interested in bringing in like a veteran kicker or someone just in case Moody was to struggle again. And Kyle Shanahan said no, that they were confident in sticking with Jake Moody and that he had a bad game today, but that they weren't going to be looking into bringing anyone else in.
Yeah, they won't. It's too late in the season. I don't think you can do that right now. I don't think you can.
A lot of people are someone just said I'm really worried about Jake Moody. Someone else said I'm not worried about Jake Moody. Jake Moody needs to get focused ASAP. So people are interested in the kicker situation. And I to be fair, I think it's a fair concern going into the playoffs when more games are going to be tight like this. The 49ers lost by 1 point. If he makes one of those, like he missed two, if he makes one of them, they win the game. And I know that this game, was basically a preseason game, so people might not, care about that, but if you can't get your confidence up in a preseason game, what are you going to do when you're beating yourself up because you just missed a field goal in a crucial playoff game?
Yeah, and here's the way I look at it. You could have an off game at every other position. If you have an off game at quarterback, your running back and your skill position groups can pick you up and you can ultimately win. Maybe even your defense picks you up. If you have an off game, at another position, there are different levels to that same, to that level or that side of the field that can help pick you up, and you ultimately don't have a bad performance overall. But if you have an off game as a kicker, it's felt. The whole team feels it if you have an off game as a kicker. I think that's the one position, special teams, kicker and punter, where you cannot afford to have an off game. So I understand people not having an issue with Moody. I don't really. I think he bounces back. But I do think that there is a right to be worried, understanding that if he has one off game, that could change the entire direction of a playoff game. That could. So you cannot, whatever, by any cost, you cannot have an off game in the playoffs during those 3 games.
Do you think if he misses in, let's say, the first playoff game, but they win the game, do you think that Kyle Shanahan maybe changes his tone with the whole not bringing in? Or is it one
No.
of those things, the kickers that are around are not going to be reliable at this point anyways?
Kyle Shanahan invested in Jake Moody the second he named him the week 1 starter. You had Zane Gonzalez, you had other options. The second Kyle Shanahan invested in Jake Moody, he put his reputation on the line for Jake Moody. You can't change kickers at this point. I don't know how much you can, especially a kicker off the street. I don't know how much you're going to trust that kicker in the playoffs if you just insert them then and there. Because if they're on the street at this point, there's probably a reason why they're still on the street at this point at the kicker position. So I think you continue to roll with it. The main question I would have is, does he change how aggressive he gets, understanding that his kicker could have some issues? Again, I think this is all going to be settled in the divisional game. If it
That's
continues,
not even like a
then we've got
terrible
some
problem.
issues.
I kind of like when Kyle's more aggressive.
Say what? Say that again?
To me, that wouldn't even be the biggest of issues because I kind of appreciate aggressive play calling on.
It depends. But in the playoffs, it's a little bit of a different environment in that you appreciate aggressiveness, but there's also aggressiveness to a fault where you do have to understand when to temper it, when to take your points, because every point matters in the playoffs. And so you'll see teams amp up the aggressiveness, but they'll also settle for field goals when they understand how how the game script could go. Whereas if it's a regular season game, you might be willing to be more or maybe even be less aggressive, that kind of thing. I think that it's a lot more situational football in the postseason, and that kind of changes the outlook of how you try and approach it.